Donald Trump, he was elected not because of what he is and not because of what he'll do, but because of a public perception, at least among a great number of Americans, a public perception of what he is and what he will do. And, well, reality is dawning already. He's gone back on prosecuting Hillary Clinton for extraordinary levels of criminal activity and corruption and much more. He's going back on climate change being a hoax. He's condemned the so-called alt-right media that essentially got him elected. And he's going back on his Muslim ban. And he is apparently going to produce an economic package. Sits back in amazement, can't believe it, struggling with the shock, that will benefit the very rich and make them very much richer. He really has only one area left already. I mean, he's not even in office yet, where he can produce what he said he would do. And that is not to appoint heads of defense and Secretary of State from a pool of people apparently being considered that are warmongering, let's go to war with Russia, let's continue business as usual in terms of overseas imposition of American will through military means. We can only hope that he will be, even him, though it must take something, but even him will be too embarrassed to appoint those sort of people to the Defense Department and the State Department after what he has said about improving relations with Russia and not wanting to have the regime change of President Assad in Syria as a non-negotiable must be, which is fundamental to bringing an end to that US, UK, NATO members manipulated catastrophe, which is masquerading as a people's revolution in Syria. And interesting that Trump has already spoken out against the so-called alt-right. And you know, will people never learn? What politicians do, and con men and liars, sorry I repeat myself, is they tell their electorate that which they have to get to vote for them. That part of society that will vote for them, never mind the ones that won't. They have to tell that potential support what it wants to hear. And if Trump was going to get elected, he had to get this increasingly vast number of people, massively increasing number of people, who get their information overwhelmingly through what's become known as the alternative media. People who are sick of being lied to by the mainstream, decade after decade after decade. And so what Trump did is told them what they wanted to hear. So it was a climate change hoax, it was going for the economic system and sorting out the Federal Reserve and all these things that people in the alternative media want to hear. But now, of course, reality is dawning because he's going back on one after the other. And if he goes back, we hope he won't. We hope he will be too embarrassed to do it. But if he goes back on his pledges for foreign policy and puts war hawks in the key positions, then there is, before he comes to power, there is nothing left, basically, of what he said he would do. And it's a head shaker for me that significant swathes of the so-called alternative media in the United States should be supporting Trump in the belief that he was going to do what they wanted him to do. And of course, all we're seeing is a repeat of what happened with Obama and the other side of this ludicrous political so-called spectrum. He came in, he was going to be the great new political messiah of change and transformation. He wasn't going to be like George Bush before him. He wasn't going to be a warmonger. He was going to be about fairness and justice and all these things. And of course, you would take it as a gimme that the first black president would be good for black people in America. Didn't work out so well, did it? The why is simple. He was just the first black frontman president for a hidden hand cabal that had used, up to this point, white men, frontmen in the White House. So it was business as usual. But there was a difference, you see, and this is very, very significant in this psychological game that is going on, because it's all a mind game. Remember during the Bush administration when he was using the excuse of the completely internally created 9/11 to justify going into Iraq, etc. There was a very strong anti-war movement started to build in the United States. And it was made up of what people are now calling and call themselves progressives. I'll get to that later on. Then Obama comes in, the darling, the messiah of the progressives, and continues business as usual with what's happened in Libya, for instance, what's happened in Syria, and the extraordinary levels of death and destruction that his policies, in league not least with Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, have visited upon the so deeply tragic Middle East. Where's been the anti-war movement in the Obama years? Where is it? Nowhere. Why? Because when you put your faith in this Messiah president, this Mr. Progressive president, then, a number of things happen. First of all, you can't, or you don't want to admit to yourself you've been had, and thus what you would condemn Bush for, rightly before, you keep your mouth shut in terms of Obama, even though he's doing the same things. And so what we're seeing now is the same, but at the other polarity. We're having the so-called alt-right and those parts of the alternative media that supported Trump already privately, and even some, to be fair, publicly, aghast at the way he's going back on everything. So fast as well, I mean. Anyway, but some are now already defending him for going back on what he said he would do. Why are they defending him? For the same reason that the progressives went quiet and the anti-war movement went quiet once Obama came in, doing the same things that Bush had done. And alt-right, this is this new phrase for the alternative right-wing media as opposed to the mainstream right-wing media. But, you know, I started out doing what I do now. Basically, before there was an alternative media, there was literally nothing there. The odd radio station here and there. And you had to get this information out through books or by tramping around from place to place talking to next to nobody, because nobody was really interested in those days. There wasn't an alternative media. And it's worth, and I think it's important now for the alternative media, or calls itself that, to actually take a breath in the light of current events and just reevaluate what it's there for and why it came into existence in the first place. Because if you identify with a political position, whether it's right or left, whether it's Republican or Democrat, whether it's Labour or Conservative, or any other these political polarities anywhere in the world, then from where I'm sitting, you are not part of the alternative media. You are just mainstream light, if that in some cases now. The alternative media came into existence originally to point out that the whole right, center, left political paradigm is a gigantic hoax. It's a hoax because in the shadows, all these different apparently alternative political persuasions are actually masks on the same face of a force in the shadows. And that's why, whether it's a left government or a right government, essentially the same things happen and the world goes in the same direction.